I stared at the tiny airplane window, watching clouds drift by like ghosts in the pale afternoon sky, and I felt the weight of silence pressing against my chest. My husband had been gone for just 5 days, but it felt like I had aged 10 years in that time. A military funeral overseas, folded flag, 21 guns, the sharp scent of gunpowder still lingering in my mind, had left me hollow, but the world expected me to keep moving. So I did what seemed simplest. I texted the family group chat. Flight lands at 3 p.m. Can someone pick me up? No dramatic punctuation. No desperate emojis. Just words. The 3 little dots popped up almost instantly, and for a brief moment, hope stirred in my chest. But then my brother replied, "We're busy, try Uber." I blinked, reading it again, convinced I'd misinterpreted. My mom chimed in right after, "Why didn't you plan better?" My fingers trembled as I typed back, "No worries." That was all. 2 words. The same words I'd used since childhood when their dismissals cut too sharp to confront. No worries. But inside, I was unraveling. When the plane landed, the sea of reunions around me was deafening. Families embraced, children squealed, lovers clung to each other. I stood still, clutching my carry-on, invisible. My phone buzzed. A friend I hadn't spoken to in months had seen my story post about the funeral and texted, "Are you okay? Need anything?" Tears stung my eyes, but I typed back, "I'm fine." A lie. Dragging my suitcase outside, I called for an Uber. As I waited, a woman stood nearby, sobbing into her phone. "He didn't even come," she whispered, her hand shaking. I looked away, giving her privacy, but her grief was a mirror of mine. When my ride arrived, I sank into the back seat, the driver offering a polite smile. "Airport can be rough," he said gently. "Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign. The house was empty, the echoes of my husband's laughter still trapped in the walls. His coffee mug was in the sink, his jacket draped over the chair. I dropped my bag, slid down the door, and let the sobs come, raw and animal, until there was nothing left but silence. The next morning, I woke to sunlight slicing through the blinds. My phone buzzed with a message from my brother. "You made it home okay?" I stared at it, my chest burning. After everything, that was what he had to say? I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through photos of the funeral, rows of uniforms, the flag pressed into my hands, the finality of it all, and a strange clarity settled over me. I had spent my life shrinking to fit their expectations, swallowing my needs, forgiving their absence. But standing at my husband's grave, I realized something. I had no family, not really, not in the way that mattered. 2 days later, I packed a small bag and drove to the coast, to a town my husband and I had once dreamed of visiting. The ocean roared like a living thing, fierce and endless, and for the first time since he died, I felt something other than grief. I felt alive. As I walked along the beach, my phone buzzed again. "Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" "Brother, we were going to stop by today." I turned off my phone and let the waves swallow their words. That night, I sat by a bonfire alone, the flames warm against the chill air. A man playing guitar nearby strummed a song my husband used to love, and I closed my eyes, imagining him beside me. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice, "You're stronger than you know." The thought made me smile through my tears. When I returned home a week later, something in me had shifted. I wasn't the same woman who had texted, "No worries," from the airport. I was someone who knew her worth, who had seen what abandonment looked like and survived it. So when my brother showed up at my door, guilt etched on his face, and stammered, "We didn't mean to." Mom was stressed, I was busy, I cut him off. "You left me," I said simply. "You both left me when I needed you most. And I won't forget that." His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "We're family," he said weakly. I shook my head. "Family shows up. You didn't." He left soon after, and though the ache remained, I felt lighter. Because I finally understood, family isn't defined by blood, or by who fills a group chat with empty words. It's defined by who shows up when your world is crumbling. And as painful as it was, I knew my future would be built not on the people who abandoned me, but on the strength I found in myself, and the unexpected kindness of strangers who saw me, even when my own family did not. The days that followed were heavy, like trudging through molasses. Everywhere I turned in the house, I bumped into my husband's absence. His boots by the door, the half-read book on the nightstand, the blanket he always wrapped around himself during late-night movies. Each object whispered his name, and yet the silence was deafening. People say grief comes in waves, but for me it was a storm that never broke, hovering overhead, threatening to collapse. On the 4th day after I came home, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, my mother stood there, arms crossed, her face tight with something between concern and irritation. "You didn't answer my texts," she said flatly. I stepped aside, letting her in. She looked around the living room as though expecting chaos. "You should have told us how serious this was," she added, her voice clipped. "How serious what was?" I asked, bewildered. She waved her hand, frustrated. "Losing him. The funeral. Everything. We didn't realize you'd need so much support." I stared at her, anger bubbling up like lava. "You didn't realize?" "Mom, I buried my husband. Alone. I asked for one thing, just a ride home from the airport. And you told me to plan better." Her cheeks flushed, but instead of apologizing, she muttered, "We were busy. You know your brother's work schedule, and she trailed off." "You what?" I pressed. "I didn't know what to say to you," she admitted, her eyes darting away. "I thought if I ignored it, it would be easier." Easier. The word stung worse than a slap. "For who?" I demanded. "Easier for you?" "Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for me." She flinched at my tone, and for a second, I thought she might apologize, but instead she sighed and shook her head. "You've always been too sensitive." That was it. The same dismissal I'd heard my entire life, the same phrase that silenced my cries when I was a child, the same weapon they wielded to make me small. I straightened, my grief hardening into steel. "No, Mom. I'm not too sensitive. I just finally stopped pretending your neglect doesn't hurt." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, she grabbed her purse and muttered, "Maybe it's best if we give you some space." As the door closed behind her, I sank to the floor, trembling, but not from weakness. For the first time, I had spoken my truth out loud. And though it felt like ripping open a wound, it was also freeing. That night, I cooked dinner for myself, a simple meal of pasta and garlic bread, and ate it at the table alone. At first, the quiet gnawed at me, but then I remembered the beach, the firelight, the music drifting over the waves. I remembered how it felt to breathe without their voices crowding me. And slowly, I realized that solitude didn't have to mean loneliness. It could mean space. Space to heal. Space to grow. The following week, a friend from college, Clara, called out of the blue. She'd seen one of the news posts about the funeral. "I can't believe I didn't know sooner," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Do you want me to come visit?" Something in me softened at her offer. "I'd like that," I admitted. When Clara arrived 2 days later, she hugged me so tightly I thought I might break, but instead, I found myself clinging to her like a lifeline. We spent the weekend drinking wine, reminiscing about old times, and sitting in comfortable silence when the grief hit me like a wave. She didn't flinch. She didn't tell me to get over it. She just sat with me, present. And in those small, simple gestures, I found more family than I ever had in my blood relatives. On Sunday evening, as she packed to leave, she looked me in the eye and said, "You deserve people who show up for you. Don't forget that." Her words echoed long after she drove away. The next time my brother texted me, "Want to meet for coffee?" I hesitated. Part of me longed to say yes, to smooth things over, to return to the fragile peace we'd always maintained. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger on that beach and in Clara's presence, whispered, "Not until he understands." So I wrote back, "Not right now. I need space." For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. The weeks turned into months. I joined a local support group for widows, where I met women who had walked paths similar to mine. Some were older, some younger, but all carried the same invisible scars. We shared stories, cried together, and sometimes even laughed, and I began to realize that grief didn't have to isolate me. It could connect me. One evening, after a particularly raw session, a woman named Evelyn turned to me and said, "You know, the hardest part isn't losing them. It's realizing who shows up afterward, and who doesn't." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know exactly what you mean." And I did. It was around that time that I decided to sell the house. It wasn't an easy choice, so many memories lived within those walls, but it was also a place of ghosts, of echoes that kept me trapped in the past. When I told my family, my mother sniffed and said, "You're being dramatic." My brother muttered, "You'll regret it." But I didn't. Instead, I found a small cottage near the coast, not far from the beach my husband and I had dreamed of. The day I moved in, I lit a candle in his honor and whispered, "We made it." And in that moment, I felt him with me. The cottage smelled of fresh paint and pine the day I moved in. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a porch that overlooked the ocean, but it felt alive in a way the old house never had after my husband's passing. Each morning, I would wake to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks, and for the first time in months, my chest felt a little lighter. I painted the walls soft colors, sky blue in the bedroom, sandy beige in the living room, and filled the shelves with books and seashells I collected from the beach. The place slowly transformed into something warm, something mine. Each decision, from the color of the curtains to the dishes in the cupboard, was a declaration: this is my life now. I get to choose. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of the boxes, I found an old photo album buried beneath winter coats. Dust coated the leather cover, but when I opened it, memories spilled out. Me and my husband laughing in the kitchen, him in uniform, us holding hands at the fair. I traced his face with my finger, tears brimming in my eyes. For a moment, the grief threatened to pull me under again. But then I closed the album and whispered, "You're still here, in every piece of me. I'll carry you forward." That evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked down to the shoreline. The tide was low, revealing tide pools glittering like tiny galaxies. A little girl nearby squealed with delight as she pointed at a starfish, her father lifting her high onto his shoulders. Watching them, I felt a pang of longing, but not for what I had lost, for what I still might find. Not another marriage, not yet, but connection, joy, family of my own choosing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my brother: "We heard you moved. Mom's upset. She says you're shutting us out." I stared at the words, heat prickling my skin. Shutting them out? They had shut me out long before. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, and then I typed, "I'm building something new. You're welcome to be part of it if you can respect me. But I won't beg anymore." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. No reply came. Days passed, and my life settled into a rhythm. Morning walks along the beach, afternoons writing in my journal or painting shells with watercolors, evenings sitting on the porch with a cup of tea. Sometimes loneliness crept in, but it no longer felt like a curse. It was simply space, space I was learning to fill with meaning. One Saturday, I joined a community cleanup project along the shore. Dozens of strangers gathered with gloves and trash bags, laughter and chatter filling the salty air. A woman named Marisol handed me a bag and said, "We're glad you're here." That simple sentence nearly undid me. For so long, I had been invisible in my own family, yet here, with strangers, I was seen. After the cleanup, we all sat on picnic blankets, sharing sandwiches and stories. Marisol told me about her own journey, losing her sister to cancer, finding healing in community work. I listened, nodding, my heart aching with recognition. It's strange, I said softly, how the people you think will be there, aren't. She squeezed my hand. And sometimes the ones you never expected, are. That night, I lay in bed thinking about her words. Maybe that was what life was teaching me, that family isn't fixed, it's chosen. And maybe, just maybe, I could choose better this time. 2 weeks later, I hosted my first dinner at the cottage. Nothing fancy, just pasta, garlic bread, and wine, but Marisol came, along with a few others from the cleanup group. We laughed until our sides hurt, traded stories under the glow of string lights I'd hung across the porch, and for the first time in a long while, my home was filled with warmth. At one point, Marisol raised her glass and said, "To new beginnings." To new beginnings, I echoed, my voice thick with emotion. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my brother. "I shouldn't have left you alone at the airport. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to cling to that apology, to let it stitch the wound shut. But another part knew it was only a start, and a late one at that. So I wrote back, "Thank you. But I need more than words. I need actions." He didn't reply immediately, but later that week, a card arrived in the mail. Inside was a photo of us as kids, playing in the backyard. Underneath, in his messy handwriting, "I want to show up better. If you'll let me." I held the card against my chest, torn between anger and love, hurt and hope. Could I trust him again? Did I even want to? The questions swirled, but I realized something important. I had time. I didn't need to decide right now. Healing wasn't about rushing back into old patterns. It was about protecting the space I'd fought so hard to claim. That evening, I stood on the porch as the sky turned pink and gold, the waves rolling steady and sure. For the first time, I felt like I was standing not in the ruins of my old life, but at the threshold of something new. The ocean had become my anchor. Each morning, I'd walk barefoot along the shore, the sand cool against my skin, the waves brushing my ankles as though reminding me I was still here, still alive. Some days I cried, some days I laughed, and some days I simply breathed, which felt like a victory in itself. It was during one of these walks that I saw a familiar figure waiting on the rocks by the waterline. My brother. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his shoulders hunched, his face unreadable. My instinct was to turn around, to avoid whatever conversation was coming, but something inside me whispered, "Not this time." As I approached, he looked up. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey." For a moment, the waves filled the silence between us. Finally, he blurted, "I was wrong. At the airport. With everything. I thought. I don't know what I thought. That you'd be fine. That you didn't need us." I folded my arms, my throat tight. "You thought wrong." He nodded, his jaw working. "I know. And I hate myself for it. I didn't know how to handle your grief. I barely know how to handle my own life. So I took the easy way out. I told myself you'd figure it out. But the truth is, I abandoned you." Hearing him say it out loud sent a shiver down my spine. For so long, I'd been the one naming the wound, while my family dismissed it. Now, finally, he was acknowledging it himself. "I can't change what I did," he continued, his voice cracking. "But I want to be here now. If you'll let me." I stared at him, torn. Memories of his dismissal burned hot in my chest, but so did memories of us as kids. Building forts in the living room, racing bikes down the street, laughing until our stomachs hurt. Could both be true? Could he be both the boy who once loved me fiercely and the man who failed me when it mattered most? "You hurt me," I said finally, my voice trembling. "More than you know." "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry." The words didn't erase the past, but they landed differently this time. They weren't excuses. They weren't half-hearted. They were raw. Honest. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I admitted. Then let me earn it, he said. One step at a time. For a long moment, we just stood there, the tide creeping closer to our shoes. Then I nodded, a small but significant gesture. One step. His shoulders sagged with relief, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of the brother I used to know. After that day, he began showing up. Slowly, carefully. He drove down on weekends to help me fix things around the cottage. He came to one of the community dinners, awkward at first but trying. He even joined me on a cleanup project, his hands clumsy with the trash bags, his jokes a little forced, but his effort real. And with each step, my walls softened, not crumbling all at once, but shifting, like stones moved gently by the tide. My mother, on the other hand, remained distant. She sent the occasional text, clipped and formal, but she never visited. At first, her silence stung. But over time, I realized I didn't miss her presence. I missed the idea of her, the mother I had always wanted but never truly had. Accepting that difference was painful, but it was also liberating. One evening, after another long day of work and grief, I lit a candle on the porch, a ritual I'd adopted in my husband's honor. As the flame flickered, I whispered, "I'm trying. I hope you're proud." A breeze rustled the trees, and I chose to believe it was his answer. Later that night, Marisol and a few friends came over for dinner. We cooked together, laughter echoing in the small kitchen, and as we sat down to eat, I realized something profound: this was family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I was building. People who showed up. People who saw me. Halfway through the meal, my brother arrived unexpectedly. He knocked shyly on the door, holding a pie from a local bakery. "Thought I'd bring dessert," he said, his ears red. Everyone welcomed him in, and as we sat around the table, something inside me loosened. It wasn't perfect, there were still cracks, still scars, but there was also possibility. A chance to weave together old and new, to create something stronger. When the evening wound down, Marisol hugged me tightly. "Look at you," she whispered. "You're not just surviving. You're living." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "I think I finally am." As I closed the door behind the last guest, I stood in the quiet cottage, the scent of pie and garlic still lingering in the air. My husband's absence was still there, a shadow in every room, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it walked beside me, a reminder of love that had shaped me, of strength I hadn't known I possessed. And when I looked out at the ocean, steady and endless, I felt it again, that sense of beginning. Not a replacement for what I had lost, but a continuation. A new chapter. A new life. The seasons shifted gently along the coast. Summer melted into autumn, the air crisp with salt and pine, and I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Grief was still my companion, it always would be, but it no longer defined me. It was simply a thread woven into the larger fabric of my life. By then, my cottage had become more than just a home. It was a gathering place. Every month, I hosted dinners for friends and neighbors. People brought food, laughter, stories, sometimes even their tears. My little porch, once silent and empty, now glowed with string lights and conversation late into the night. And with each gathering, I felt the walls I'd once built around my heart crumble a little more. One particularly chilly evening, as the group lingered over coffee and pie, my brother stood up, clearing his throat. "I need to say something," he began, his voice nervous. The table quieted. He looked directly at me. "I'll never forgive myself for not being there when you needed me most. But I want you to know, I'm not running anymore. You matter to me. More than my pride, more than my excuses. You're my sister, and I love you." The words hung in the air like fragile glass. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, slowly, I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "One step at a time," I whispered. Tears glistened in his eyes, and he nodded. That moment didn't erase the past, but it stitched something new into place, a tentative bridge, fragile but real. My mother never crossed that bridge. She remained a voice at the end of occasional phone calls, her tone clipped, her affection conditional. For a long time, I wrestled with that absence, the ache of a mother-shaped void. But eventually, I stopped trying to force love where it didn't exist. Instead, I poured my energy into nurturing the connections that nourished me. One afternoon, while tending to the small garden I'd started behind the cottage, Marisol stopped by with a basket of fresh bread. She watched me dig in the soil for a while before saying, "You've changed." I brushed dirt from my hands, smiling faintly. "I feel like I'm finally becoming myself." "Grief does that," she said softly. "It breaks us open. But sometimes, what grows in the cracks is stronger than what was there before." Her words stayed with me long after she left. As winter approached, I began a new tradition. Every evening, I walked to the water's edge with a candle in hand. I'd light it, whisper my husband's name, and set it down on the sand. The flame flickered against the dark sky, a tiny beacon against the vastness of the sea. Some nights, I'd see other candles too, left by neighbors who had joined me after hearing the story. Soon, the shoreline glowed with dozens of lights, each one a symbol of love, loss, and memory. The first time my brother joined me, he stood awkwardly beside me, holding his own candle. "For Dad," he murmured. We lit our candles together, side by side, and for the first time in years, I felt the old bond between us begin to stitch itself back together, not as it was before, but as something new, fragile, and honest. Spring came again, bringing with it blooms of wildflowers along the dunes and warmer nights on the porch. One evening, I sat with Marisol, Clara, and a few others, listening to the waves and sipping wine. Clara leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, when you texted me that you were fine after the funeral, I knew you were lying. But I'm glad you let me in anyway." I laughed softly, shaking my head. I guess I was finally tired of saying, "No worries." Everyone chuckled, but my voice grew serious as I added, "That was the moment I realized I couldn't keep living small. I had to start choosing myself." "And you did," Marisol said. "Look at what you've built." I glanced around at the glowing faces, at the warmth spilling from my cottage, at the ocean stretching endlessly beyond us. My heart swelled with gratitude. I thought losing him would be the end of me, I admitted. But maybe it was also the beginning. Not because I wanted it, not because I was ready, but because life demanded I grow. And somehow, I did. Silence fell, gentle and reverent, as if the universe itself was listening. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood on the porch alone. The stars glittered above, the waves hummed below, and the candle on the railing flickered steadily in the breeze. "I'm okay," I whispered into the night. "I miss you every day. But I'm okay." And for the first time since that devastating flight home, I truly believed it.